We would like to thank Mr. President Truman and the other members of the Advisory Council for hearing our arguments today. World War II has been the most devastating war in human history. The total casualties have risen to a level previously unimaginable. The war in Europe is now over, and we must end the war with Japan. For the past 3 years, a team of top scientists have been developing nuclear weapons to counter the German nuclear weapon threat. We now have it within our power to end the war with Japan using these nuclear weapons. Although using the atomic bomb on Japan would undoubtedly bring an eventual end to the war, clearing away the last obstacle to Japanese surrender by allowing the emperor to remain will retain the United States' moral leadership, will bring a much swifter end to the war than any other means considered, and will prevent further Soviet intervention in East Asia and the Pacific.
Thank you, Garrett. Undoubtedly, dropping the new atomic weapon that we have developed would bring an eventual end to the war and show to the other nations involved in the war that we do not tolerate evil. And our troops fighting in Japan do deserve a swift end to the war. But we must, however, confront the many issues brought up by this new technology. First of all, dropping the atomic bomb on Japan would open the door to future atomic warfare, ushering in an era of devastation on an unimaginable scale. Dropping the atomic bomb on Japan is not necessary to their surrender, since there are other more peaceful ways of negotiating surrender with them. They are nearly defeated. We have crippled her military and her navy and her air force, and the last remaining obstacle standing in the way of their surrender is the ambiguity regarding the role of their emperor after their surrender.
Thank you, Josh. Japan will not surrender because they have no guarantee of the post-war position of their emperor. This ambiguity surrounding the status of their emperor must be cleared away to obtain a swift Japanese surrender. In a letter from the combined British-American Intelligence Committee to the combined Chiefs of Staff, it was stated that, quote, "The Japanese believe that unconditional surrender would be the equivalent of national extinction, foreign occupation of the Japanese homeland, foreign custody of the person of the emperor, and the loss of prestige entailed by the acceptance of unconditional surrender are most revolting to the Japanese. To avoid these conditions, if possible, and, in any event, to ensure the survival of the institution of the emperor, the Japanese might well be willing to withdraw from all territory they have seized, and even to agree to the independence of Korea and the practical disarmament of their military forces," close quote. Unquestionably, if we make it clear to Japan that the emperor will not be harmed and may even remain in a symbolic role post-war, Japan will quickly surrender, and there will be no loss of civilian life and no invasion of Japan.
Negotiating surrender with Japan will maintain the moral leadership that America holds over Japan. President Truman, you received a letter from 70 of the scientists that worked on the Manhattan Project, in which they say, quote, "The development of atomic power will provide the nations with new means of destruction. The atomic bombs at our disposal represents only the first step in this direction, and there is almost no limit to the destructive power which will become available in the course of its future development. Thus, a nation which sets the precedent of using these newly liberated forces of nature for purposes of destruction may have to bear the responsibility of opening the door to an era of devastation on an unimaginable scale." Unquote. Restraining our power by not using the atomic bomb will certainly maintain America's moral leadership, and it will prove to the rest of the world that we have set a precedent of using these new atomic weapons responsibly.
Not only would clarifying the role of the emperor in post-war Japan retain our moral leadership, but it will also bring about a swift end to the war. We can all agree that we owe it to our heroic troops to bring them home as quickly as possible. This plan of removing the last obstacles to Japanese surrender by clarifying the role of the Japanese emperor in post-war Japan will be the swiftest available method to obtain this Japanese surrender. Japan wants and needs to surrender. In a memorandum from the Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, to you, Mr. President, he said, quote, "We have the following enormously favorable factors on our side, factors much weightier than those we had against Germany. Japan has no allies. Her navy is nearly destroyed, and she is vulnerable to a surface and underwater blockade, which can deprive her of sufficient food and supplies for her population. She is terribly vulnerable to our concentrated air attack upon her crowded cities and industrial and food resources. She has against her not only the Anglo-American forces, but the rising forces of China and the ominous threat of Russia. We have inexhaustible and untouched industrial resources to bring to bear, close quotes. When clarity surrounding the emperor's future position is extended to Japan, they will surrender. We intercepted a telegram on July 11th from the Japanese Minister of Foreign Affairs to the Japanese ambassador to the Soviet Union. In it, the Japanese state this, quote, "The foreign and domestic situation for the empire is very serious, and even the termination of war is now being considered privately. This indicates the Japanese desire for surrender. The prevention of surrender is the ambiguity about the future position of the emperor, as made clear in the report from the combined British-American Intelligence Committee to the combined chiefs of staff. We can all agree this war needs to end, and this plan is the very best way."
As well as bringing a swift end to the war, negotiating surrender with Japan will keep the Soviet Union out of involvement in this war between us and Japan. Although Russia's invasion of Japan would likely cause Japan to surrender, Russia will doubtlessly demand possession of some of the spoils and lands taken by Japan from northern China and the Pacific Islands surrounding Japan. Negotiating surrender with Japan now will keep the Soviet Union from spreading its communist influence in Japan and China.
Using the atomic bomb on Japanese civilians would certainly bring an eventual end to the war, but at a terrible cost. The best course of action for this nation to pursue is to clear away the last obstacle to Japanese surrender by clarifying to the Japanese that the emperor will remain. This plan will retain America's moral leadership, bring the quickest possible conclusion to this war, and avert further Soviet involvement in the Pacific theater. This is not a time for indecision. The war must end, and the plan outlined above is undeniably the best way to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua and Garrett, for presenting option 1. Option 2, as soon as you guys stand up, start it.
President Truman, thank you for hearing our position. While Japan does need to surrender, as the war has dragged on long enough, we can't justify not taking extreme action because of the loss that has ensued. However, dropping an atomic bomb would cause complete devastation from what we have seen. We agree that human preservation is a tenet of our country, and that we as Americans value chivalry. However, the U.S. total combat casualties in the war against Japan are numbering over 100,000 at this point. We argue that an atomic bomb should be dropped on a deserted island. The luminescence of the atomic bomb will be seen from around 10,000 to 20,000 feet away. It would be known, but it would not cause harm. The radiation would be dangerous in a radius of at least 2/3 of a mile, but the distance would be further than that. We have paid too high a price to accept anything less than unconditional surrender from Japan. The war must come to a swift end.
It need hardly be said that America will accept only an unconditional surrender to ensure the end of this war, both now and in future years. But Japan would rather commit national suicide. An answer has been provided. We have recently successfully developed an atomic bomb. Some say we must use it on Japanese cities shock them into surrender before Soviet influence can increase in Asia. We do not argue that dropping a bomb on inhabited cities would not induce surrender, but the resulting peace would be strained. Japanese hatred for America would increase, and war with them in future years would be inevitable. We would merely be postponing the deaths of our American troops. We as a civilized nation are bound by certain principles of war, namely the principle of humanity, military necessity, and chivalry, which all prohibit unnecessary actions of violence. It need hardly be said that when faced with a decision which may result in ruined cities and deaths of civilians, we must carefully consider whether it truly is necessary. There is another option which has been provided. We can drop a warning bomb on a deserted island in the Pacific to display our might. This makes dropping a bomb directly on civilians unnecessary, while sustaining our international stature and laying down a strict standard if this weapon must be used in future years. In the unlikely event Japan still refuses to surrender, only then will we be authorized to drop it on cities. Japanese leaders would be morally responsible for the death of their citizens, since they witnessed the power, understood that the bomb was not a hoax, heard our warnings, yet still declined to surrender. Due to the principles for which America stands, we have a moral responsibility to use this atomic bomb wisely and humanely. And this humanitarian path addresses both the urgency and necessity of this time, saving lives of our people and theirs, while simultaneously upholding America's values and strengthening the resulting peace. The United States, if they follow this course, will be able to boast for years to come that we possessed a weapon of mass destruction, which, in the interests of our enemy, we decline to use.
The atomic bomb does take quite a bit of resources, and it could be argued that the US could not waste one on a demonstration. However, as said in the Frank Report of June 1945, the military advantages and the saving of American lives achieved by the sudden use of atomic bombs against Japan may be outweighed by the ensuing loss of confidence and by a wave of horror and repulsion sweeping over the rest of the world, and perhaps even dividing the public opinion at home. From this point of view, a demonstration of the new weapon might be best made. But the best possible atmosphere for the achievement of an international agreement could be achieved if America could say to the world, "You see the sort of weapon that we had but did not use. Saving humanity is more important than a big spectacle. However, something must be done."
It is apparent that the Japanese are intent on expanding their empire at whatever the cost of our soldiers, their soldiers, and even their civilians. We cannot stand by idly in hopes that this war will come to an end. We must do something. By demonstrating an atomic bomb, we will set the standard for use of atomic weapons in future years and avoid needless slaughter of their civilians. We will strengthen our alliances and also scare the Soviets out of their growing influence in Asia.
Thank you, Team 2. Option 2. All right, Option 3. I will reset the clock and start as soon as you're ready.
Mr. President Truman and other members of the Advisory Council, we must bring the war to a swift end while saving untold numbers of lives and caring for the future lasting peace. We have seen throughout this brutal war that the Japanese will not surrender to conventional military tactics. The former U.S. ambassador to Japan, Joseph Grew, has stated, "I know the Japanese intimately. The Japanese will not crack. They will not crack morally or psychologically or economically, even when eventual defeat stares them in the face. They will pull in their belts another notch and fight to the bitter end. Only by utter physical destruction or utter exhaustion can they be defeated. That is the difference between the Germans and the Japanese. That is what we are up against in fighting Japan." As we've seen throughout the course of the war, the Japanese can sustain enormous casualties such as those which they suffered at Okinawa and Iwo Jima, and yet they will not surrender. Only the shock of an atomic bomb being dropped on the Japanese cities will be sufficient to convince the Japanese officials to end their insane war.
Although some argue that dropping an atomic bomb on Japan's cities and causing the deaths of innocent Japanese civilians will violate the principles for which we as Americans have fought this war, ultimately less lives will be lost if we are to drop the atomic bomb, and that will honor our American values. The longer we wait to end this war, the more lives will be lost unnecessarily on both sides. We possess the power to defeat Japan once and for all. To not use it would be an insult to our soldiers who have fought all these years for the sake of our country. Under the principle of military necessity, the U.S. is justified in applying any amount and any kind of force to compel the complete submission of the enemy with the least possible expenditure of time, life, and money. We must use the atomic bomb on Japan's cities to preserve our American values of doing all that is necessary for the sake of peace and for the sake of our soldiers.
Using the atomic bomb on a Japanese city is the surest and most effective way of saving the most American lives, not even mentioning Japanese. General Douglas MacArthur has estimated that an invasion of Japan would cost over 1 million American casualties, not even counting the numbers of Japanese who would die. And if we do not drop the bomb, an invasion is the only other option. The Japanese death toll would rise significantly with an invasion, as even the civilians have been taught to fight, even if it means running at the invaders with sharpened bamboo sticks.
Dropping an atomic bomb on Japan's cities will not only save the most number of lives in the end, but will impress the Soviets with our country's power and compel them to soften their position on the future of Eastern Europe. We have spent over $2 billion in developing this bomb. We must use it in the most effective way possible and not let it go to waste through a mere demonstration. That would only make the US appear weak to the Soviets and increase Japanese resolve. Dropping the bomb will cause the Soviets and other nations to rethink stirring up conflict with us in the future.
While some argue that we must not use the atomic bomb, as it will prompt an arms race among other countries, particularly the Soviet Union, to develop atomic weapons for their own protection, this is an inevitable reality that the modern world must face, and it overlooks the greater present problem of Japan. We must first deal with quelling the Japanese, and then only then can we focus on the Soviet problem.
Japan's unconditional surrender is essential in order to establish a stable, lasting peace and promptly conclude the war before the Soviets get involved in northern China. The Japanese have proven that they are unconditionally loyal to their emperor, and they are willing to defend his honor as well as the honor of their country at all costs. Allowing Emperor Hirohito to remain in his position would only risk the resurgence of militarism and threaten the lasting peace that we have worked so hard to achieve. We must end the war with Japan's unconditional surrender. Seeking negotiations or a demonstration of the bomb would only prolong the war, costing more lives, while risking the Soviets invading in northern China and spreading communism further. Using the atomic bomb on Japan's cities is the only way to ensure Japan's unconditional surrender, spare the most lives, and restore peace to the modern world.
Excellent job. Option 2, 1, 2, and 3. Now we are going to go to the question questions, either prepared or unprepared by the other two teams. So option one, you will have 6 minutes of questions being asked of you by option 2 and 3. What we'll do, option 2 and 3, is if you can indicate your question by a raise of hand, and we'll go back and forth between teams. Okay, I'll start the clock. And option 2, I'll give you guys the option to ask first, followed by option 3. Followed by option 1. Any questions for me at this point? Okay. Sorry.
So who are we using?
So option 2, if you have a question, sorry, didn't make it clear. If you have a question, just indicate by a raise of hands, and we'll go back and forth between the teams for the option 2 and option 3 to ask option 1 questions. Okay, I'll start the clock, and whoever raises hand first, I suppose, I'll take your team's question. Option 3.
Okay. If Japan still refuses to surrender after negotiations, and a land invasion is not to be, and if you do not wish to do a land invasion, what other alternatives do you suggest?
At that point, you drop the atomic bomb. The position of clearing away the last obstacles of Japanese surrender by clarifying the position of the emperor in post-war Japan will work and is the best option and should be tried before the atomic bomb is dropped because it will save countless lives and it will end the war even quicker than dropping it at home.
Option 2, you're on the floor.
So how certain are you that this invasion plan would work versus the shock of dropping the bomb?
Well, we're not suggesting that we do invade. We recognize that that would cost millions of lives. We're saying no lives would be lost at all. That we can simply negotiate and surrender.
We have physical evidence from the Japanese that they want to surrender. We stated it in a telegram we intercepted from the Japanese on July 11th, from the Japanese Minister of Foreign Affairs to the Japanese ambassador to the Soviet Union. The Japanese stated that the foreign and domestic situation for the empire is very serious, and even the termination of the war is now being considered practical. The Japanese are already thinking about surrender, but as was clarified in the Combined British American Intelligence Committee, in the letter from the committee to Combined Chiefs of Staff, the Japanese do not wish to surrender without confirmation of the position of their emperor in post-war Japan.
Option 3, you have the floor.
Have you considered that opening up for negotiations might increase Japanese resolve to keep fighting?
I would hesitate to say that it would increase Japanese resolve. That is a potential, but as it currently stands, Japan has less than 1 million barrels of oil left. They're forced to use kamikaze fighting to fight us. They do not have the resources to carry on the war. And as has been made clear before, Japan needs to surrender and they want to surrender. The High Command is thinking about surrender. I do not think that opening up, and we're not even opening up negotiations, we're just clarifying the Potsdam Declaration, the role of the emperor in post-war Japan. I don't think that,
Even if it is perceived as a sign of weakness, they don't even have the resources to continue the war.
I don't think it would encourage them to carry on the war.
Option 2, you have the floor if you wish. Or we can pass to option 3.
Let's pass to
Option 3?
Mhm.
Option 3.
Okay. What makes you believe that the Japanese will surrender?
restate the question?
What makes you believe that the Japanese will surrender while the emperor remains in their honor code, still binds them to protect their country?
Because he's in favor of surrender, so they will listen to him.
Alright, so, please restate the question one more time for me.
What makes you believe that the Japanese will surrender while their honor code still binds them to their emperor in preserving him and their country?
So our plan preserves the emperor, which is why they'll surrender. They do not want to surrender if their emperor is going to be taken away from them. As we've seen in the report from the Combined British American Intelligence Committee to the Combined Chiefs of Staff, it was said that rather the Japanese as a nation have a strong concept of national survival regardless of the fate of individuals. They would probably prefer national survival even though surrender to virtual extinction. National survival includes the survival of the emperor because they view the emperor as a symbolic figurehead, even a god. So by retaining the emperor, the Japanese would be willing to surrender.
Any further questions, option two?
Given the aftermath of World War I, how can you be certain that there will not be a rise of new dictators, especially given the strong position the Japanese have shown?
Okay.
And stop. Okay. Option two. It is your turn now to field questions from option one and option three. I will start with option one. If not, we can defer to three with a raise of hand. I know that you have a question. We'll reset the clock and start. Option one.
So, if you consider the Tokyo bombing raids, which killed hundreds of thousands of people and leveled 16 square miles of Tokyo, what proof do you have that dropping a bomb on an uninhabited island, which would kill no one and destroy no cities, would have much more of an effect?
The shock of the bomb, the sheer luminescence of it alone shocked the scientists that were developing it. We believe that it would show them that we have technology they cannot defend against while still being humanitarian.
Option three.
Based on Japan's continual refusal to surrender in the face of widespread bombing, a demonstration of the atomic bomb on an island would fail to impress the Japanese and cause them to surrender. How do you justify prolonging the war, costing further American and Japanese lives, and opening the door to Soviet invasion of northern China? Don't we owe it to our troops to end the war as soon as possible?
We do owe it to our troops to end the war as soon as possible. Can you rephrase the question?
Yes. The Japanese have shown that a mere crater on an island will unlikely impress them and compel them to surrender. And in staging a demonstration, we're going to be prolonging the war, which will cost more lives and open a Soviet invasion of northern China. Shouldn't we end the war as soon as possible?
We should, but as I stated before, the sheer shock of the bomb would be visible and threatening enough. It is said by someone at the base camp, quote, "I haven't gotten over it yet. It was awful, ominous, personally threatening. I couldn't tell why." The explosion was also likened to a line from a Hindu holy book, quote, "I am become death, the shatterer of worlds, we believe that it would be enough of a shock.
Option one, you have the floor.
So going back to our question about the disparity between how firebomb in Tokyo did not cause Japanese surrender and how dropping an atomic bomb on uninhabited island you posit would cause Japanese surrender. You stated that one of your major points was that the luminescence would be seen from a very far distance. You stated 10 to 20,000 feet. Fire in Tokyo was seen as far as 100 miles away. How do you, how would dropping an atomic bomb on an uninhabited island, seen from very far away, 10 to 20,000 feet, how would that cause Japanese surrender when the fire in Tokyo leveled 16 square miles and killed 100,000 people and was seen 100 miles away?
Well, this atomic bomb is new technology that Japanese don't understand. Also, it will open a path for even greater technology, which then the Japanese would be afraid we will use on them.
Option three. No further questions. Option one.
So, how would showing our power by demonstration help? Like, wouldn't that antagonize us for the rest of the world if we were just to show our power in a publicly threatening way?
I don't believe it would. We believe that Japan must be jolted into surrendering. Negotiations, we don't believe would work. We believe that that would just lead them further into the war.
Also, refusing to drop an atomic bomb directly on Japan shows that America upholds human rights, and our alliances will become stronger because of our respect for basic human rights.
Any further questions of option one and three?
No further questions.
No further
No
questions.
further questions.
Okay. And finally, option three, it's your turn to receive questions from option one and two. I will reset the clock. Option two, this time you may go first if you wish. For option three, I'll start the clock now.
Given the moral code that the United States holds, how do you fully justify the slaughtering of thousands of innocent civilians?
Well, first, the principle of chivalry. I think we can all agree that dropping an atomic bomb and costing innocent lives does not seem chivalrous. However, one could argue that dropping bombs on Tokyo, also costing innocent lives, was also not honoring the code of chivalry. In any case, innocent civilians are going to die. This is a tragic reality of the war that we find ourselves in. But we feel it is our duty to act in the best interests of the most civilians. And we believe that by dropping the atomic bomb, more lives are going to be saved on both the Japanese and American sides. And the principle of humanity, you also mentioned, which states that it prohibits the use of any degree of violence. It's not actually necessary for the war. We believe that this is absolutely necessary. This is the degree of violence that is necessary to bring this war to an end.
Option one.
America's principles, as Americans, we strive to fight a just war. One of the bases for just war is Augustine's says, a just war is wont to be described as one that avenges wrongs, when a nation or state has to be punished for refusing to make amends for the wrongs inflicted by its subjects. Because we have destroyed Japan's navy and air force, practically crippled her army, firebombed her cities, leveling thousands of acres of urban area, and leaving over 1 million people homeless, and starved her nation of oil, does the mass destruction of civilian life fall under the principle of military necessity in the State Department's military principles of war? According to Augustine's writings on just war, it seems to me that Japan has already been aptly punished, and that further punishment would make this war unjust.
We believe that the Japanese will not surrender, that their moral code, their worldview binds them to fight until the very end. Therefore, this is strictly necessary.
Option 2, you have the floor. If you wish, or you may pass.
How would you address the possibility that after showing we don't uphold the principles of war and we drop a bomb on civilians, how would you address the possibility that the Soviet Union would rush to develop weapons like ours for their own protection and use them on us?
As we addressed in our speech, the arms race for nuclear weapons is an inevitable reality that this world must face. In truth, to believe that we really could keep the atomic bomb secret forever is an oversight of the nature of this modern world. The Soviet Union would build nuclear weapons if we dropped it, if we demonstrated it, and even if we kept it a secret. It is practically impossible to keep true secrets.
And at this point in time, our priority should be to defeat Japan once and for all. They're the biggest necessity at hand at this current moment.
Option 1.
All right. How can you justify killing thousands of civilians and prolonging the war even by a few days when an option exists for ending the war even within hours while saving thousands of civilian lives and obtaining a much better surrender condition for us?
Okay. As we've stated before, we do not believe that the Japanese will surrender to anything but the enormous shock of an atomic bomb. We have had the testimony of our former U.S. ambassador, and for that reason, we feel that the fastest and only way to end this war is to drop the atomic bomb on Japanese cities.
While it is not known the sheer extent of the effects of radiation, how do you justify subjecting large cities?
And time. Okay, I'll reset the clock. Option 1, 2, and 3, you have 2 minutes to discuss as a team your final statement, and then you will have another 2 minutes per team to make your closing arguments. I'll start the clock now.